has called it the worst financial crisis since the 1930s. The Washington Post described Wednesday as one of the most tumultuous days ever for financial markets. A recent Financial Times headline wrote, quote, "Goodbye capitalism, American style." The events on Wall Street in recent weeks have shocked the financial world. The federal government has used taxpayer money to bail out the mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as well as the American Insurance Group. Meanwhile, Lehman Brothers has declared bankruptcy, Merrill Lynch has been bought out by Bank of America, and Morgan Stanley is in talks to sell almost half of the company to a state-run Chinese investment fund. And now the Fed and Congress are working on an unprecedented bailout plan that would result in the most direct commitment of taxpayer funds so far in the financial crisis.
While the press has extensively covered the Wall Street meltdown, little attention's been paid to what this means for the American worker. On Thursday, the Federal Reserve announced American households lost $3 trillion over the past 9 months. The nation's unemployment rate has reached 6.1%, a 5-year high. The unemployment rate for African Americans is now in double digits at 10.6%. Wages remain stagnant, and retirement funds are taking a major hit as stock values plummet. Since President Bush took office, the S&P 500 has fallen 14%. We're joined now from Washington, D.C. by longtime labor activist and writer Bill Fletcher. He's co-author of the new book, Solidarity Divided: The Crisis in Organized Labor and a New Path Towards Social Justice. He's executive editor of blackcommentator.com and former president of TransAfrica Forum. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Bill Fletcher.
Amy, Juan, thank you for having me on the program.
It's great to have you with us. Why don't you start out by simply talking about that issue? How has this global meltdown affected the American worker?
Well, among other things, Amy, what it means is that the whole illusion that we have something called the free market economy is gone. I mean, here we have for years been subject to this propaganda blitz regarding deregulation and that regulations have hurt the economy. And now what we're seeing is an implosion that government is prepared to respond to by assisting corporations. But there has been, this situation has been disastrous for workers, and not just in the most recent past. Workers and farmers, actually, if you go back to the 1980s.
Bill, one of the areas that hasn't gotten very much attention is our union pension funds as well, because many pension funds in recent years began investing not in conservative bonds, government securities, but increasingly got into equities and even into venture capital and private equity funds. What's been the impact? Is your sense of what's going to happen to the retirement funds of so many of not only the pension funds, but increasing number of Americans who were convinced to get into by their employers 401k retirement funds, which were basically invested in the stock market?
I'm glad you asked that. Let's just divide it into two pieces. One is that back in the 1980s, we started to see the end of, or the decline of pensions, actually defined benefit pensions, where workers would retire and actually could count on a steady income. We started to see this replaced with the rise of the 401ks that you mentioned, and this whole illusion that that if you invest in the market, you get a piece of the rock, and that you'll be better off than having these defined contribution or defined benefit plans. So the first problem is that workers, fewer and fewer workers actually have pensions of any sort. In the most recent past, it's exactly as you described. I mean, workers are looking at their futures dissolving in front of them. It's as if it's a piece of film that's melting before their eyes, as these overly ambitious objectives were stated in terms of pension investments. So what workers are now wondering is, as they watch their 401ks decline, as they watch their pensions disappear, what kind of future do they have? And can they actually retire? And I don't mean that as a rhetorical point, Ron. It's like, will workers be able to retire? Or actually, are we talking about working until you drop?
And what this means, you've got the defined pension plans, as Juan asked, and the 401ks right now, and the path
That's
you
right.
think that people should be going.
Well, the path is several-fold. I think that part of what we have to do is we have to break with this ideology around deregulation. And I think that reality is now forcing that to happen. But I think that the more fundamental issue, Amy, is that we need the union movement and other workers' organizations to really mount a counterattack. This issue, many unions for years accepted, very reluctantly, but accepted the notion that all we could get were 401ks. Part of what we're really arguing about is a change in the priorities of this country. Workers have a right to a decent retirement. They have a right to live out the rest of their lives without looking over their shoulders, wondering whether or not their entire life is going to collapse. But it's not just for those workers. What's happened increasingly is that those who are working, who are not retiring, have to take care, what do they call it, the sandwich generation, have to take care of their parents, but also their children, and in some cases their grandchildren. So what's happening is that workers are getting squeezed, and they're looking around for answers, and they're looking around for a champion. And the union movement needs to be that champion.
Bill, I'd like to touch on another note. A few years ago, the financial industry lobbied fiercely in Congress and got the support of both Democrats and Republicans to rewrite bankruptcy laws to make it difficult for individuals who were in debt to be able to file for bankruptcy. And now you have this situation where the very financial companies that tried to prevent individual Americans from being having some kind of an opportunity to bail themselves out from their individual financial troubles are now rushing to the government to assist them in their financial troubles.
More of the same. I mean, just as you said, but let's go back even a little further. Think about the Silverado savings and loan debacle at the end of the 80s. You know, anytime capital, big business, finds itself threatened, all of this whole thing about free market, it just goes right out the window. And it's at that point that they're looking for government bailouts, for the government to step in and save them. And that happened in Silverado Savings and Loan. But for working people, for farmers in the 1980s in the Midwest, for working people more generally, when they are being squeezed, the political operatives that represent the interests of big business step in and say, no, 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 no. You are not entitled to a bailout. You are not entitled to welfare. That you are basically out of luck. And just as you described, during a period when we were perhaps a little bit more stable economically, the Republicans were able to move that legislation in that, in fact, restricted the ability of regular people to declare bankruptcy. Now, why do regular people declare bankruptcy? Not because of bizarre investments, largely because of healthcare costs, because they have been driven to bankruptcy because they can no longer afford their healthcare payments, because they've lost a job, or because their insurance has run out. That's why regular people have declared bankruptcy. The Republicans put a block on that in order to make that more restrictive. But now we have, what, Wall Street, where we're suffering as a result of the irresponsible, absolutely irresponsible investments in game playing by these individuals. And what happens? Government is forced to bail them out. Otherwise, we are in complete meltdown.
On the issue of the bankruptcy law, one of the chief engines of passing that pro-corporate bankruptcy law was, well, the Democratic vice presidential candidate, Joe Biden of Delaware.
I knew you were going to raise that, Amy. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this for those of us that do support the Obama campaign and candidacy, although critically, one of the things that we're concerned about is that this is not a retread of the Clinton years. And it's not a retread of those economists like Rubin, who basically promoted the free market mania, although with a velvet cover. That is absolutely a concern. And I think that it's critically important that were pushing Senator Obama to recognize that this is not simply going back to the Clinton years. This was one of my concerns during the Democratic convention, when there were all of these references to the great Clinton years. Well, you know, let's be a little bit careful about what was happening during that time, and particularly the elimination of welfare, the bankruptcy legislation, as you just mentioned. I mean, we're not talking about going back. We cannot be talking about that. We have to talk about a new set of economic policies that really breaks with what we saw under Reagan, the first Bush, Clinton, and now the last Bush.
We're going to break, then we're going to come back. Bill Fletcher is our guest. He is co-author of the new book, Solidarity Divided, The Crisis in Organized Labor, and a New Path for Social Justice. After we finish our